I always thought my days of sudden violence were behind me. That the battlefield was something I'd left overseas, not something that would ever find me in my own home, in the middle of suburbia. But that illusion shattered the moment a nightmare I couldn't have imagined came barging through my front door. At dawn, when the world is supposed to be quiet, when you expect the soft chirping of birds and the gentle rustle of trees, I woke to chaos. Not the chaos of war, not the kind that comes with explosions or the whistle of bullets, but the chaos of betrayal, of evil dressed in civility, wearing perfume and a pantsuit. The president of our homeowners association, yes, an HOA president, decided to crown herself judge, jury, and executioner over my family. She stormed into my house with hired muscle, men who thought intimidation and cheap tactical gear made them warriors. Behind her, a camera recorded every second, as if she were staging her own reality show. But the worst of it wasn't the invasion of my home. It wasn't the splintering of my door or the shouting of commands meant to scare us into compliance. The worst part was her target. Not me. Not my wife. But my newborn daughter, Grace. 3 days old. Still so tiny she fit into the crook of my arm like she was molded to belong there. She wanted to take her. Rip her from her mother's arms, from her crib, from the safety of her home. And for what? Some fabricated court order she probably printed after downing a glass of boxed wine with her HOA buddies. She thought she could walk into my house and steal my baby. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand, was that I'm not just a suburban dad fumbling with diapers and sleepless nights. I am a Navy SEAL. And every instinct in me, every ounce of training I had ever endured, snapped awake in that moment. But before I tell you how it ended, before I explain how I went from cradling my infant daughter to fighting 3 men in my own bedroom, let me take you back to the very second everything began to unravel. The baby's cry and the shattered door. The first sound wasn't the door. It wasn't boots or shouting. It was my daughter. Grace's cry sliced through the dawn like a knife, sharp and fragile, the kind of sound only a newborn can make. It wasn't pain, it was shock, confusion, a little soul waking to find the world around her had suddenly turned hostile. That cry went straight into my chest like a spear, and in that instant, I was no longer asleep, no longer dreaming of peace. I was on my feet before my mind caught up, before logic could ask what was happening. And then came the crack. A deep, splintering crack as my front door, my brand new front door, painted cheerful blue just weeks before, was kicked clean off its hinges. I'd put hours of work into that door. Stripped it, sanded it, painted it with steady hands, wanting our first home to be perfect. Now it slammed against the wall like a battering ram, the impact rattling the frame, echoing through every room like thunder. For a fraction of a second, a ridiculous thought flashed in my head, that's going to be hell to patch up. Then the shouting began. Child Protective Services. We have a warrant. Stay where you are. The voice was female, sharp and nasal, carrying that smug authority that's less about the law and more about ego. The kind of tone I recognized instantly. Not military command. Not law enforcement professionalism. No, this was someone playing dress up with power. I moved without thinking, instinct guiding me before reason. My body remembered drills, remembered what to do when under siege, even if the battlefield this time was a quiet house on Oakwood Creek instead of a compound half a world away. I planted myself between the bedroom door and my wife, Kylie. She was upright in bed, eyes wide, sheets clutched to her chest. She had given birth just 3 days ago. Her face was pale, tired, drawn with exhaustion and stitches that still tugged painfully at her body. But now there was more, terror, raw and unfiltered. David, what is happening? She whispered, her voice breaking, trembling like she was already on the edge of collapse. I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Instead, I raised a hand, palm out, a silent command drilled into my bones, stay. Don't move. Don't speak. And then the boots. Heavy boots pounding down our hallway, striking against the hardwood floors I'd just installed. At least 4 of them. Maybe more. They weren't being careful. They wanted us to hear them, wanted us to be afraid, wanted to break us down before they even entered the room. And truth be told, for one brief heartbeat, it worked. My chest was a drumbeat, my pulse roaring in my ears. But my hands were steady. My breathing stayed even. When the adrenaline comes, you either drown in it, or you ride it like a wave. I had spent years learning how to ride it. The door burst open. And standing there in the frame was the last person on earth I expected to see. Karen Lowe. The Queen of Oakwood Creek. President of the HOA. Tyrant of the cul-de-sac. Her blonde hair was lacquered into an immovable helmet of hairspray, lips painted a shade of red that screamed vanity, twisted into a smirk. A monster wrapped in a pantsuit. And behind her, 3 men. Big men, stuffed into mismatched tactical gear that looked like it had been ordered in bulk from a knockoff catalog. Their helmets and black vests were meant to look professional, but anyone with real experience could see it. They were clumsy, poorly equipped, pretenders. And yet, they had come into my home. Behind them was the final insult, a scrawny man clutching a video camera, the red light blinking, recording everything like he was filming a scandal for evening news. His lens locked onto us, onto my wife's fragile state, onto my newborn's crib. That was when I knew this wasn't chaos. It was staged. Scripted. Planned for maximum humiliation. And I wasn't going to let it happen. "There they are," Karen announced, her voice booming with fake sympathy, but her eyes gleamed with victory. She wasn't speaking to me, or to Kylie. She was speaking to the camera. Every word was staged, rehearsed, dripping with the same falseness as a cheap daytime courtroom show. "The unstable father, the incapacitated mother, and the poor, helpless child," she declared, painting us as villains while her lens captured the script she had written in her twisted imagination. Her manicured finger rose, trembling not from fear but from theatrical flourish, and pointed directly at me. "David Martinez," she spat, "you are a danger to your family. We are here to rescue your daughter." Rescue. The word seared into my ears like acid. Rescue? As if ripping a 3-day-old baby from her crib, from her mother's side, from the warmth and safety of her home, could ever be called rescue. That word, twisted in her mouth, was more violent than the door shattering, more threatening than the boots in my hallway. She held up a piece of paper with dramatic flair, waving it like it was divine scripture. "This is a court order, signed by a judge. We are taking custody of the child." The cameraman zoomed in, capturing the paper in a close-up before swinging the lens back to my face. His red light blinked like a predator's eye, catching every twitch of my jaw, every spark of rage. Then he turned the camera on Kylie, my wife, barely recovering from surgery, clutching her stomach with one hand while tears streamed down her face. Her other arm instinctively reached toward Grace's bassinet, desperate to shield her. "Please," she sobbed. "She's only 3 days old. She needs me." Her voice cracked on the word needs, the truth of it echoing off the walls, raw and undeniable. But Karen ignored her completely. That smirk on her face never faltered. To her, Kylie wasn't a mother, wasn't a human being. She was a prop, a background character in Karen's self-made drama. "Get the baby," Karen ordered her 3 hired thugs. "And bring the mother. She needs a full psychiatric evaluation." The words were delivered with relish, dripping with contempt. She wanted Kylie institutionalized. She wanted Grace stolen. And she wanted me destroyed, all while her little cameraman captured every second to twist later as evidence of her righteous intervention. 2 of the men started moving toward the bassinet, their boots heavy, their hands reaching. The third began unfolding a gurney, its metal legs clanging on the hardwood, the sound hollow and final. That was the line. Every ounce of patience I had carried since leaving the Navy, every hope that I could put violence behind me, that I could finally build a quiet life with my wife and daughter, burned away in that moment. I wasn't a neighbor anymore. I wasn't a homeowner. I was a SEAL again. And I would not let them lay a single finger on my family. My heart slowed down. Funny, isn't it? Most people's panic spikes when danger walks into their home. Mine does the opposite. The chaos outside gets quieter, the adrenaline sharpens everything. It's not fear. It's focus. I studied the battlefield, because that's what my bedroom had become. Karen stood too close, her arrogance blinding her to danger. The cameraman hovered behind her, trembling hands keeping the lens locked on me. The 2 goons moving toward Grace were heavy-footed, overconfident, not trained for speed or precision. The third thug was distracted with the gurney, his focus split between setting it up and glancing nervously at me. My voice, when it finally came, didn't sound like mine. It was lower. Colder. The voice of a man I thought I had buried with my trident. "Get away from her." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a threat. It was a fact delivered like steel. The goons hesitated, just for half a beat. One of them glanced at Karen, waiting for reassurance. Karen's response was a laugh. A short, sharp bark that cut the air like a slap. "Don't listen to him," she sneered. "He's all talk. Get the baby." The words ignited something inside me. A fire I'd been trying to smother since the day I left the Navy. I didn't want to be that man anymore, the one who lived by force, who settled everything with fists and weapons. I wanted to be a husband. A father. A neighbor who barbecued on weekends and argued about football. But Karen had just ripped that life out of my hands. She wanted my daughter. The first thug reached for Grace's bassinet, his gloved fingers hovering above her tiny, fragile form. Kylie's scream filled the room, raw terror spilling out of her throat. "Don't you touch her!" Grace's wail rose higher, her tiny lungs straining, her face red from fear. The sound tore through me. My daughter, 3 days old, her first memory of this world being strangers reaching for her while her parents fought to protect her. That was it. There are moments in a man's life where hesitation dies, where instinct takes command. This was mine. Time slowed. I saw everything, the smirk on Karen's face, the gleam of the camera's red light, the cruel inevitability in the thug's reach. And I moved. I grabbed the oak chair by the window. Heavy, solid, the kind of furniture that doesn't creak when you sit in it. In my hands, it wasn't a chair anymore, it was a weapon. I spun it with the efficiency of muscle memory, swinging it like an axe. The first goon never saw it coming. The wood connected with the side of his helmet in a sickening crack, shards of cheap plastic visor flying across the room. He staggered backward, clutching his face, roaring in pain. One down. The second thug lunged toward me, his hands outstretched for Grace's crib. I didn't think, I reacted. My shoulder slammed into his chest like a battering ram, driving him backward. He stumbled, off balance. Before he could recover, I grabbed his wrist, the one hovering near a taser clip to his belt. I twisted hard. Bone ground against bone with a sickening snap. He screamed, a high-pitched shriek that no man wants to admit came from his own throat. His knees buckled, his weapon clattering uselessly to the floor. 2 down. The third, the big one with the gurney, finally realized he wasn't walking into an easy snatch and grab. He roared, charging at me with raw strength but no discipline. He was big, but he was slow. I sidestepped, stuck out my foot, and let his momentum do the work. He went sprawling face first into the carpet, the crash shaking the floorboards. The gurney legs clattered uselessly beside him. 3 down. The room fell into a sudden silence, broken only by Grace's wail and Kylie's sobs. My knuckles throbbed, blood rushing hot in my ears. The chair slipped from my hands, now splintered from impact, but I didn't need it anymore. My body was the weapon. Karen's smirk was gone. Replaced with wide-eyed disbelief, her painted lips parted in a silent gasp. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain. The cameraman froze in the corner, still holding the lens steady though his arms shook. He hadn't dropped it. He hadn't run. He was capturing everything, his blinking red light recording proof that her operation had turned into something very different from the staged rescue she'd planned. I stepped forward, kicking the taser away from the kneeling thug, and leveled my eyes at Karen. My voice came out a snarl, low and guttural. Get out of my house. The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. The kind of weight only a man who means every syllable can deliver. And for the first time, Karen didn't have a comeback. But then, sirens. Not distant. Not faint. Close. Right outside. Red and blue light bled through the window blinds, flashing across the walls in dizzying streaks. And in that moment, dread sank into my gut. Karen hadn't come alone. She had called them in advance. 2 deputies appeared in the doorway, pistols leveled, voices sharp and commanding. Drop to your knees. Hands behind your head. Now. Their tone left no room for negotiation. They weren't asking, they were trained to bark orders, and they expected compliance. I froze, my mind catching up to the inevitable truth. To them, I didn't look like a father protecting his wife and child from a deranged neighbor. No, thanks to Karen's lies, I was the threat, the violent, unstable veteran who had just assaulted officers of the court. Karen played her part flawlessly. Her smirk slid back onto her face, wide and venomous. She gestured toward me with a trembling hand, her voice dripping with false concern. See? Exactly like I told you. Dangerous. Unstable. He attacked us. Her words weren't for the deputies. They were for the camera, for the record she was building. Every second of this nightmare was another brick in the prison she wanted to build around me. My heart pounded, not from fear for myself, but from the sight of Kylie. She was still in her hospital gown, stitches pulling against her skin as she clutched at her stomach with one hand, the other reaching toward Grace's crib. Her face was wet with tears, her body trembling. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, weaker, fragile in a way that tore me apart inside. And Grace. My daughter's cries had risen to a desperate wail, tiny fists waving helplessly in the air. That sound wasn't just crying, it was terror. The kind of terror no child should ever know, especially not 3 days into life. I wanted to fight. Every instinct screamed at me to rip the pistols from their hands, to clear the room, to end this madness with decisive violence. But my training whispered something else. Survival isn't always the trigger pull, it's knowing when to live to fight another day. Slowly, I lowered myself to my knees, hands lacing behind my head. The deputies moved in, swift and methodical, cuffing my wrists with cold steel that bit into my skin. Karen's smirk widened, stretching like a wound across her face. Thank you, officers, she cooed, venom hidden under her mock-sweet tone. Now, please secure the child before he hurts someone else. The deputy's attention shifted. And in that moment, my world cracked open. Two of the thugs, still battered, but upright, moved toward Kylie. They pried her trembling hands from the crib, ignoring her screams, forcing her toward the gurney. She cried out in pain as her stitches pulled, her voice raw and desperate. "No! Please! She's just a baby!" They didn't listen. They strapped her down like she was some kind of criminal, rolling the gurney toward the hallway. Karen followed, reaching for Grace with clawed hands, her nails flashing under the bedroom light. The cameraman trailed behind, recording every second, his lens hungry for misery. And me? I was helpless. Bound. Forced to watch as the nightmare unfolded in front of me. But what Karen didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't as helpless as I looked. My fight hadn't started that morning. I had prepared for this long before. The thugs wheeled Kylie's gurney down the hallway, her voice cracking with each plea. "David, don't let them take her. Please, please, she's just a baby." Her cries stabbed through me worse than the cuffs biting into my wrists. I strained against the steel, the chain digging deeper as if the more I resisted, the more they mocked me. My whole body shook with the urge to break free, to rip through every one of them and end this farce in seconds. Karen, drunk on power, leaned into Grace's crib, scooping her up with a smirk plastered across her painted face. My newborn daughter, still swaddled in a pink blanket, wailed in her arms. Karen clutched her like a trophy she had won at the county fair. "This child will be safe now," Karen announced to the deputies and the blinking red eye of the camera. "Safe from violence. Safe from instability. Safe from him." Her words were honeyed poison, coating lies with the sickly sweetness of false virtue. The cameraman followed close behind, his lens practically drooling over the footage. This wasn't justice, it was theater. Karen wasn't rescuing Grace. She was staging her grand performance. A self-made martyr, the neighborhood savior. And I was her villain. As they reached the front door, red and blue lights strobed across the entryway, casting long shadows that warped across the walls. The deputies flanked Karen like her personal escort. And then it happened. The quiet suburban street outside erupted in chaos. A flashbang detonated in the driveway, the sharp pop and burst of light cutting through the morning air. The cameraman flinched, his lens whipping to the side. Karen shrieked, stumbling back with Grace clutched tight in her arms. The deputies swung their pistols outward, scanning in confusion. From the convoy parked at the curb, shadows moved, disciplined, precise, coordinated. Not rent-a-cops. Not bumbling thugs in cheap gear. Professionals. A navy vest stack. The kind of men who didn't flinch at flashbangs. The kind of men who moved with the same ruthless efficiency I had once trained with. Karen's smirk, her arrogance, her entire facade cracked in an instant. She hadn't planned for this. She thought she owned the stage. She thought she wrote the script. But she didn't know whose show she had walked into. Because this wasn't just my house. It was a fortress. And I hadn't been alone in defending it. Karen froze at the threshold, clutching Grace so tightly the baby's cries turned into tiny gasps. Her painted lips trembled as the street outside transformed from her staged courtroom drama into something she couldn't control. The deputies shouted, voices cracking under pressure. "What the hell is going on? Identify yourselves." But the men outside didn't answer with words. They answered with precision, moving as a unit, fanning out across my driveway, their rifles low but ready, their posture radiating one truth: they weren't here to play games. Karen's carefully choreographed narrative, the unstable father, the rescue mission, the heroic HOA president saving a child, collapsed in seconds. Her cameraman, once eager to catch every angle, now shook so violently the footage blurred into nonsense. And me? Even in cuffs, even forced to my knees in my own bedroom, I felt a cold smile tug at the corner of my lips. Because this wasn't her trap. It was mine. You see, my home wasn't just walls and shingles. It was layered with quiet defenses, the kind only someone like me would think to set up. Every camera, from the doorbell to the discreet lenses tucked under the eaves, wasn't just recording to a hard drive. They were streaming. Real time. Encrypted. Routed to a secure server. And that server wasn't anonymous. It wasn't idle. It was monitored by friends. Old friends. The kind of men who didn't just serve, they lived for the code we swore to uphold. Some wore uniforms still. Others carried their service into quieter roles, the kind the public rarely sees. When the front door had splintered that morning, those cameras didn't just record, they alerted. Alarms tripped silently, signals sent across networks that Karen couldn't even imagine existed. So while she was staging her spectacle, I was already calling in shadows. The Navy doesn't forget its own. Not when a brother raises the flag. And now, standing in my driveway, was the answer. Operators. Professionals. My brothers in arms. Karen looked from the deputies to the flashing lights, to the silhouettes of men who radiated authority far beyond her little HOA kingdom. Her smirk had curdled into a pale mask of disbelief. She had no script for this scene. The cameraman whimpered, lowering the lens for the first time. One of the deputies swallowed hard, his pistol hand shaking as he realized he might be pointing his weapon at people far above his pay grade. And Grace? My daughter's cries quieted for just a second, as if even her tiny soul could sense the shift. The air itself had changed. The cavalry had arrived. And Karen was about to learn the hardest lesson of her life: you don't pick a fight with a Navy SEAL in his own home. The deputies were shouting over each other now, their commands tangled and desperate. Stay back. Stay where you are. But their voices betrayed them, they weren't in control anymore. They knew it. Everyone knew it. Karen clutched Grace tighter, her knuckles white, her eyes darting like a cornered rat. This is illegal, she screeched, her voice cracking under the strain. You can't be here. This is my jurisdiction. I'm protecting this child. But her words fell flat against the silence of the men outside. They didn't argue. They didn't posture. They simply moved. One stepped forward, tall, broad, helmet visor down. His voice was calm, commanding, like steel wrapped in velvet. Put the infant down. Now. It wasn't a request. Karen tried to bark back, I have authority. This man is unstable. He's violent. The operator cut her off, stepping closer, his presence swallowing the room. You're endangering a newborn. Put her down. Karen's mask cracked. Her smirk, her faux confidence, it all drained away, leaving behind nothing but fear. She looked at the deputies for backup, but they were frozen, caught between a screeching HOA president and a squad of professionals who looked like they'd just walked out of a war zone. The cameraman's lens wavered. For the first time, his footage wasn't for Karen. It was for survival. His trembling hands couldn't hide the fact that he knew he was capturing evidence that would bury her. Karen's lips quivered. Her eyes darted toward the gurney, toward Kylie's struggling body. My wife's voice cut through the chaos, weak but burning with fury. You touch her one more time. Kylie's words broke as the thugs shoved the gurney against the wall, trying to hold her down. Something in me snapped. Even cuffed, even on my knees, I surged upward. My shoulder slammed into the deputy behind me, knocking him off balance. I twisted my wrists, ignoring the tearing pain as the metal bit into my skin. My body remembered what my mind didn't need to calculate: leverage, torque, momentum. With a guttural roar, I ripped free. The cuffs split. And the seal was loose. The room erupted. One thug went flying into the wall with a scream. Another caught my elbow square in the jaw, teeth shattering under the blow. I moved like water, like fire, like the storm they never saw coming. Karen shrieked, stumbling backward as the operator stepped in, plucking Grace from her arms with clinical precision. My daughter was safe, swaddled against a chest plate that radiated safety, not malice. Karen reached for her, screeching like a banshee. She's mine. I saved her. She's mine. The operator's response was cold, unflinching. No. She was never yours. And just like that, the script she had written, the fantasy she had built brick by brick, collapsed into ash. They say every war begins long before the first shot is fired. That morning, with Karen clawing for my daughter and my cuffs lying broken on the floor, wasn't the beginning, it was the end of a story that had been brewing since the day we moved into Oakwood Creek. It all started with that perfect little bungalow. 2 bedrooms, a white picket fence, and a backyard big enough for dreams. I wanted peace. Kylie wanted stability. We thought we found it. But peace was never an option, not with Karen Lowe. Fred, our neighbor, warned us that she ran the HOA like a dictator in pearls. He wasn't exaggerating. Within a week, we got our first violation. A violation for a garden gnome Kylie's grandmother had given us, a simple, harmless gnome. According to Karen's bylaws, it was unapproved. That was her first shot across the bow. I laughed it off, at first. After years in combat zones, how bad could a power-hungry suburban queen really be? But Karen wasn't satisfied with painted mailboxes and lawn gnome purges. She wanted control. Absolute control. And when control slipped through her fingers, she invented new ways to claw it back. One by one, neighbors bent the knee. They stopped planting the wrong flowers, stopped parking their cars the wrong way, stopped leaving their trash bins out 10 minutes too long. They obeyed. And if they didn't? Karen made examples out of them. We resisted. And that's when the harassment began. Petty fines. Harassment letters. Anonymous complaints about our dog, even though we didn't own one. Rumors whispered about me being dangerous. About Kylie being unfit. And then, Kylie got pregnant. That's when Karen escalated. The notes turned into threats. The HOA inspections became invasive. She started showing up unannounced, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp and hungry. She smiled at Kylie, but her words dripped with venom. Are you sure this neighborhood is right for you, dear? Some people just can't handle the responsibilities of parenthood. She wanted us gone. But when we didn't bend, she turned her sights on something else, our unborn child. That night, when she kicked down my door with her pretend soldiers, she wasn't enforcing bylaws. She was staging a coup. A hostile takeover of a family. But here's the thing Karen didn't understand. I wasn't just some suburban dad trying to plant roses in peace. I was a Navy SEAL. I'd fought men who thought fear was their greatest weapon. And every one of them had learned the same lesson Karen just did: fear only works if your enemy believes in it. Karen's kingdom of control collapsed the moment my daughter was in safe hands, the moment my cuffs broke, the moment her lies met the truth. The sirens outside didn't belong to her anymore. They belonged to my people. Real law enforcement. Real authority. Karen Lowe, self-proclaimed queen of Oakwood Creek, was dragged out of my house kicking and screaming, her world unraveling on the very camera she brought to damn me. And me? I stood in my living room, holding my wife, watching my daughter breathe peacefully in the arms of men I trusted with my life. For the first time in months, I felt the one thing Karen had tried to steal from me. Peace. This was never just about an HOA. It was about power. About bullies who think rules make them kings, and families who forget their own strength. But that morning proved something. My family wasn't hers to take. My daughter wasn't hers to own. And no matter how many fake court orders or desperate lies she waved in front of a camera, Karen Lowe would never win. Because you don't steal from a SEAL. Not his peace. Not his wife. And never, ever his child.